Hello and welcome. This is Malachi Bishop, professor with the Rehabilitation Counseling Program at the University of Kentucky, and this is Week 1, Part 2 of RC-750, Rehabilitation Counseling Research and Program Evaluation. And in this section, we'll be talking about the purpose of rehabilitation counseling research and looking at some hot topics or important topics currently in the area of rehabilitation counseling research. We'll start by talking about the purpose of research in general. The purpose of formal research is generally described in terms of three activities. Research, first of all, is used to describe. So its first purpose is description, describing natural or social phenomena, information obtained through observation and recording, and the purpose of research sometimes is simply to describe the situation as it is happening. Second purpose is prediction. Prediction involves predicting phenomena based on known information that arises from description. So frequently in the process of exploring an area of research, we begin with description. We say, we don't know what's happening in this area, but it's important that we find out. So for example, working with people with non-visible disabilities, and we want to find out, are they disclosing their disability in the job interview process? Are they not? And when they do disclose that they have a disability, what kind of outcomes are they achieving? Are they having good outcomes? Are they more likely to be hired or not? We don't know at this point, so let's go ahead and take a look and see what people are doing. And so we might go and explore that situation, and then be able to, after doing that research, we would be able to describe the phenomenon, the situation, and say, this many people or this percentage of people seem to be disclosing that they have a non-visible disability, and these are the results that they're having, and this many or this percentage of people are choosing not to disclose, and these are the outcomes that they're having. So just sort of saying this is what the situation is. And the second purpose, prediction, what happens is after we have gained a picture of what's happening, we can start to form hypotheses and make predictions about what will happen next. So if a person discloses that they have a non-visible disability in an employment interview, we can predict that they either will or will not get hired based on our the descriptive research. And then the third purpose of formal research is explanation. And here's where we identify the underlying mechanisms or processes or behaviors. We try to understand why it is that these things are happening, why it is that what we're seeing is occurring. This is often achieved by developing and testing theories or models. And explanation is described as allowing generalization of knowledge. So as you can see, it's a process. First we describe the phenomenon, then we are able to make predictions about the phenomenon, and then research also helps us to explain the phenomenon, understand what's happening underneath the surface, and figure things out. So that's the purpose of research in general. What about the purpose of rehabilitation counseling research? I'm going to say that there are basically three. If we consider rehabilitation counseling research generally, I would say that there are three general aims, three general areas that we look at. The first is the purpose of improving the lives of persons with disabilities and facilitating the achievement of their goals as they define them. I think that's our first and most important process in conducting rehabilitation counseling research. We also spend a lot of time working on improving our profession, the rehabilitation counseling profession. So we do a lot of research to enhance the effectiveness of rehabilitation counselors, to examine policies and systems and see if they are effective, and then to identify effective professional practices. So the second purpose is to improve the profession. And then the third purpose, I'd say, is understanding the psychosocial impact of disability on individuals, families, and groups. And related to that, understand the relationships between disability, psychosocial functioning, and quality of life, and understand the interaction of disability, environment, and society. So I'd say those are the three broad purposes of rehabilitation counseling research. But I would also say that rehabilitation counseling research is a tremendously broad area with a great diversity. It's as diverse as the profession itself. I think it's interesting to note that even though rehabilitation counseling emerged originally as a profession in response to a very specific need back in 1920, to assist veterans and then citizens in 1920 to assist citizens with physical disabilities to become employed. You think about how we started and what we looked like at the beginning of our profession, and how what we have become almost 100 years later, and you can see the expansion in terms of the persons that we serve, the professional settings in which we work, the services that we offer, and our professional goals. A way to consider this is just to look at just one of those areas, our professional settings, where rehabilitation counselors are working. And if you think originally we were basically working in the state federal rehabilitation agencies, and then you think about where rehabilitation counselors are working now based on surveys of certified rehabilitation counselors. We know that rehab counselors are working in private nonprofit rehab centers, medical and hospital settings, colleges and universities, centers for people with developmental disabilities, VA and veterans organizations, workers' comp, psychiatric hospitals, K-12 schools, private proprietary rehabilitation companies, county agencies, federal agencies, businesses and industry, and so on. It goes on. Now you consider, again, if you have rehabilitation counselors working in all these different agencies, obviously if you're a rehabilitation counselor, you're working with people with disabilities to help them to achieve their goals, but a tremendous diversity in terms of what those goals would be depending on our professional setting. And as a result, as I said, we have in rehabilitation counseling research, we have a broadly expanded scope in terms of the questions that we can look at. It means that the opportunities for research are really amazing and broad in their breadth and in the number of opportunities. In terms of the number, the sorts of questions that we can look at, and the opportunities for you as a researcher to look at those questions. In terms of our professional responsibility to conduct and be aware of current research, that has also expanded, which leads to the question, with all this research going on in all these areas, of how do we stay up? Because as rehabilitation counselors, it is critical to our effective practice, our ethical practice, our professional practice, that we do stay up to date on the research, because things change. Research changes our profession, our practice, and it's critical that we know what the research is saying. But there are so much research. How do we stay up to date and stay aware of what the research is about these days? and then also what is currently in research focus in rehabilitation counseling. I'm going to look at that too, but let's talk first about how do we stay up to date. I think an important, very important means of staying up to date with the research as rehabilitation counselors is to participate in our professional associations. Joining a professional association and participating in it provides you a number of opportunities to participate in and stay up to date on what is happening in rehabilitation counseling research. This includes conferences, newsletters, journals, webinars, and other continuing education opportunities. So among the many other reasons why it is important and beneficial to you to belong to one of our professional associations, and I'm not making any recommendations about which ones you should belong to, but I do think that you should participate in a professional rehabilitation counseling association, partly because it helps you stay up to date on the research. I mentioned journals, and as you know, if you're a member, most professional associations do publish a professional journal, and these are a great source, a very important source of rehabilitation counseling research and a way for you to stay up to date. I've listed many, certainly not all of our professional rehabilitation counseling journals, but they include, for example, the Journal of Applied Rehabilitation Counseling, which is the journal of the National Rehabilitation Counseling Association, or NARCA, the Rehabilitation Counseling Bulletin, which is the American Rehabilitation Counseling Association's journal, the Journal of Rehabilitation, which is the journal of the National Rehabilitation Association. The NRA also has a fairly new division called the Rehabilitation Counselors and Educators Association, and there are continuing education opportunities available through that division. The NCRE, the National Council on Rehabilitation Education, publishes the journal Rehabilitation Research, Policy, and Education. There are also the Rehabilitation Psychology, which is the American Psychological Association's Division 22, Rehab Psychology. It's the journal for that division of the APA, and certainly has a lot of excellent disability-related research in that journal. Also the Rehabilitation Professional, which is the journal of the IARP, the International Association of Rehabilitation Professionals, and then the VIWA journal, Vocational Evaluation and Work Adjustment Journal, and many others. Essentially, each division of many of our professional associations publishes either a journal or a newsletter or some way for you to stay on top of the research. And we will talk shortly, within the next couple of weeks, about accessing, as a student, accessing and doing research in those journals, and how you can find the research that is in them if you are not a member of all those associations. I wanted to talk about some of the current hot topics in rehabilitation counseling research, meaning what are we focusing on now these days. And as I said, we continue to focus very broadly on a large number of topics, but the sort of things that you're hearing a lot about these days are, as always, employment and rehabilitation services research. So research looking at effective practices in employment and how we provide our services as rehabilitation counselors. You probably have heard and will continue to hear a lot about evidence-based practice and what the research tells us about what is the most effective way to practice rehabilitation counseling. What practices are most effective for which people or population to reach what outcome, and how does the research support that? So we'll talk a bit more about evidence-based practice in a couple weeks. Cultural diversity and multicultural rehabilitation counseling. International rehabilitation is receiving a lot of research attention these days, as is the World Health Organization's International Classification of Functioning, the ICF. You're probably seeing that a lot in your reading. Certainly, you're probably reading and hearing and working with a lot of people with disabilities such as autism, brain injury, spinal cord injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and aging-related chronic illnesses, and diabetes. And as I said, research, what's important to researchers, comes and goes for various reasons. If you look at some of these that we're starting to see a lot of research about, like brain injury, spinal cord injury, and PTSD, the reason for the elevated research in those areas has a lot to do with the recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and many Americans coming back from those wars with these sorts of injuries and disabilities and conditions. Autism has been getting a lot of attention from researchers lately, as the prevalence seems to be rising in the U.S. Certainly, as the population is aging, we're starting to hear and see more about chronic illnesses that are associated with or more frequent among elderly people. Psychosocial research. You see continued research in the area of psychosocial adaptation, for example, but I'm glad to see more research these days coming out about things that in the past haven't received a lot of attention, like spirituality, sexuality. Developmental research looking at aging and working with rehabilitation counseling clients across the lifespan, seeing a lot of attention in that area of developmental research. And then assistive technology, certainly very hot topic these days. A lot of progress being made and a lot of evaluation about the technology that is being used. And then, as always, the one of the focuses of rehabilitation counseling research is going to be on professional issues, but the issues tend to change over time. But what's happening in the field, what's happening professionally, is a big part of our research too. So, for example, talking about things like a lot of conversation these days about rehabilitation counseling licensure and certification, for example. So issues like that are also hot topics in rehabilitation counseling research. So the point is, and that's just a few of the hot topics that I identified. The point is that there is a whole lot of fascinating research out there in a whole lot of areas. So I hope you take advantage in this course, in conducting your assignments for this course, of really looking at some of those areas that are of interest to you. So concluding our section 2 of week 1, concluding week 1, I wanted to remind you to complete the readings for next week, for week 2. I wanted to remind you that the city training needs to be completed by the end of week 2 of this course, and remind you to do your discussion board posts. In week 2, we will be talking about ethical issues in rehabilitation counseling research, conducting a literature review, and there we'll be talking about accessing the different ways that you can find rehabilitation counseling research. And then we'll be talking about narrative literature reviews, and that will relate in particular to your assignment that's due in week 4.